One of the coolest and most useful tools I've come across in recent years is the Holy Driver by Problem Solvers. Say I have two spokes of exactly the same length, but there's a problem, and if I look closely at this section here, the problem will be revealed. The length of threads can vary between spokes of exactly the same length. For example, here we see a spoke that has 9.9 millimeters of threads rolled on it, and the one underneath 8.9 millimeters of threads rolled onto it. This is a problem because if I follow a typical procedure for building a wheel, what I would do is I would lace up the wheel and then get all the nipples to the same starting point. By doing that, I would either turn all the nipples until I have 1 millimeter of thread showing, or one thread showing, or no thread showing. The problem, as you can see here, is that if I turn these two nipples on just so the last tiny bit of thread is covered, the spoke on the top will become tighter than the spoke on the bottom because the nipple is screwed on farther relative to the end of the spoke. And if there were just one thing I would want to emphasize for you, it's this: when you're tensioning your wheel, it is better to prevent the wheel from becoming out of round than to correct an out of round error. Introducing the Problem Solver's Holy Driver. This is the wheel builder's best friend. It will give you a consistent starting point for each nipple relative to the end of the spoke, so that variances in thread length don't matter. In building my wheel, if I'm using double-butted 14, 15, 14 gauge spokes that have a thickness of 2 millimeters, narrowing down to 1.8, and then thickening back to 2.0, I have dimensions something like this. I'm going to cut the spoke as shown there to cut out a piece of the narrower 1.8 millimeter section, and I'm going to file the ends flat, and that is what I'm going to put in my Holy Driver. Now, a note here: if you're using 15 gauge spokes, then you want to use a section of a 1.6 millimeter spoke. Here are two views of the Holy Driver. You see the little set screw there, which requires a 2 millimeter hex wrench, and the spoke will be inserted in that slot right there. Now, the amount that 1.8 millimeter section of spoke sticks out at the end of the Holy Driver really doesn't matter. That's variable. You can set it where you want it. I found that about 3 millimeters works well, and then you lock it in place with the set screw. But the goal here is a consistent starting point for all the nipples, so the exact amount that sticks out really isn't important. Here you've got a bunch of nipples that are spinned on to some arbitrary amount, and I'm going to put the Holy Driver into the slot on the nipple like this. So here's a close-up. We have the Holy Driver inside the nipple, and as I turn the drill, we see the nipple starting to spin on, and when the Holy Driver backs itself out, I've achieved the consistent starting point that I want. You can see that this is actually a pretty fast process. So what I'm going to do is start with this rim, and here is a little piece of red tape. That's my valve hole. And I usually start with a rear wheel by spinning up the nipples on the drive side first. And it's about as fast as this. I want to make sure that the tool is engaged in the nipple before I really give it the juice. When I see the nipple turning, I know that the Holy Driver is fully engaged. And in a matter of a couple of minutes, actually less than that, you can get all the nipples in the wheel to exactly the same starting point. And just to reiterate, the Holy Driver obviously speeds up the process of getting the nipples to the consistent starting point that you want. That's nice, but that's not really its value. Its value is the accuracy with which it does that. Now, undoubtedly, some of you have seen this tool, and at first it looks like this accomplishes the same thing, but it doesn't. This is a good tool for driving the nipples up to a point, but you can't use this to achieve the kind of consistency you want, because the tip doesn't stick out far enough and the spokes will get too tight before you're able to achieve the consistency that you want. So pick up one of these Holy drivers. You will never regret it.